Hello YouTube, this is Morgan Airspeed Prime here with my next Star Wars video. This is going to be my review for the Acolyte episode 8, so this is the series, season finale, whatever way you want to call it. So overall, I think the main thing I'll say about this coming out of this is I really want season 2. I hope this show continues because this very clearly is not a series, like an actual end of the entire Acolyte finale. There's so many open plot threads that are clearly set up in place for a season 2 and onwards, and I really would like a show to explore those topics. I definitely would say overall, like coming to the end of the season, there are some issues with, I think mainly when it comes to pacing, the fact that I think it's another Disney Plus show that doesn't quite know how long the episodes should be, how many episodes they should have to tell their story, and definitely I wished over the course of these 8 episodes that we had like an hour extra plus across a lot of these episodes, just to give a little bit more depth, to explain a little bit more, let the characters kind of breathe a little bit more, and have it not be so almost hindered a little bit by the way it went about revealing its mysteries and how much they left on the final episode to be the big reveals at the end. I think there's some very, very interesting ideas kind of explored in this episode. There's an underlying kind of tragedy to this when it comes to like the character of Soul that is so interesting to me. But I would definitely say, in terms of it being a satisfying season, they ultimately left open most of the plot threads to the point where it's hard to be like, well, oh yeah, it was a really satisfying ending to the season. It's like, it was a good season, definitely. I want more, and the ideas were good, and I hope that they get the follow-up seasons. I feel somewhat similarly to the way I felt about Ahsoka, where I felt Ahsoka was a kind of slow build and then it eventually got really good, but then like it ended right as you had properly kicked into gear. And to a certain degree, I think this show is sort of the same way of like, okay, you've shown us your hand a little bit, now do something with it. Oh, we have to wait for season 2. I think they need it, and I think it would be such a shame if they didn't continue with this show, because finally we're addressing stuff like the Sith before Palpatine and various topics like that. It's been such an unexplored aspect of the franchise. I think it was such a shame if they didn't go ahead with it, but I'll leave my general thoughts there and we'll get into the specifics here. So, we finally cut back to what's happening with Osha wearing the mask, and we see her begin to kind of freak out. And Kymer goes to help, but the idea, based on the end of the episode especially, is Osha having the thing on and what it does, kind of shutting out most of her other senses except the Force, allows her to tap into her like true potential within the Force, and she actually possesses Kymer in this scene. And that's pretty crazy because he's a bit scared by this. Like, he's not expecting to be overpowered in that way, you know, instantaneously. And so there's a shock here as this moment happens. It seems like she's not in control enough to like properly like take him over, so he's able to fight through it, and he does remove the mask, kind of breaking her connection with the Force. She also explains that she saw the future, basically, in an interesting kind of twist here. She explains that she saw May's hand reaching out, killing Soul, not using the lightsaber. But of course, it's actually herself from the final scene. And she just thinks that it must be, it must be May, but it's actually her, which I think is a quite interesting thing overall. Because I think Kymer can sense this in her. She knows it's in her, but is unwilling to admit this side of herself, and that's what's so interesting as we go into the ending. So the idea that Kymer's like, oh, so she can kill with no weapon. That's interesting. I want that. Osha moves to stop her. Keimer says that, hey, we'll go together, and basically we'll see who gets to May first. So continues the unique dynamic that these two have, where he kind of trusts her, but like she of course doesn't really trust him, but she knows she can get what she wants by being around him, so that's interesting. Then we cut back over to Sol and May. So they're talking. This is just after him revealing the truth about what happened, of course. And he planned to contact Vernestra about, everything. But what he's planning to do now is, okay, now that I know you and your sister are alive, I can prove the virgins and what happened on the planet Brendok. We now have the full proof of that, with the idea being that it all, for him, does come back to the idea of, them not being twins or sisters, but the fact that they are basically the same person. That is something that is extraordinarily notable and that needs to get reported now that they can prove it. But of course, there is a discussion about the aftermath of the backstory reveal. May thinks this is just to justify killing her mother. He says everything that happened was like an accident, but the question is obviously, why didn't you tell Osha? Why did he blame it all on her, May? But of course, Sol points out that you started the fire, you locked everyone in, like you created some of the situation that happened here for sure, even if it wasn't the entirety of this. She says she did it because the Jedi invaded her home, that everyone died because of the Jedi. And it's like, from a certain point of view, that is correct, but also it's like, there's so many other decisions that created that situation, as we saw. Saul's biggest regret was not being able to save both of them. Then he gets into the whole idea of this important reveal. He doesn't say what he wants to say next, because May uses Pip to kind of shock him, runs off, takes the escape ship, and we get the chase sequence that we've been waiting to see. So basically what they do is, like, it's like the ring around one of the moons. They kind of fly through it. She's trying to evade, but Saul has the more powerful ship. He goes to activate the lock-on computer, and this is one of these scenes where I think it's a bit like, what's going on here? Because he literally says that what he's trying to do is basically, oh, now that both of you are alive, I can prove the virgins. But then the only real interpretation you can maybe have of this scene is that he's targeting her to, like, blow up her ship, or is it just disable the ship? What? But either way, Basil is the one to react to this, and he pulls out the wires, basically stopping Saul from being able to do anything. And then May crash lands on Brendok, and Saul follows her down. But it's just a bit of a weird scene where it's like, wait, what? What's Basil doing? What was Saul trying to do here? Like, the show just wasn't clear enough about what it was trying to exactly show. And this, I think, is a situation where, like, you needed to clarify, was he locking on for a tractor beam? Was he trying to fire a disabling shot? Was he trying to blow it up full stop? We don't really know, because you didn't tell or show us. Basil felt he had to stop this. Why? That's the other part of it, is that, like, because he doesn't speak Saul's language, we can never really know what the deal was there. Next, we get this very interesting scene. So Senator Rayencourt was mentioned in previous episodes, so we finally get to meet this character. There's obviously a lot of tension in this scene. It's clear these two do not like each other at all. They're on very much opposite views of things here. He has heard about the murder investigation that she's kind of conducting. She says, I'm allowed to handle it internally as long as I feel it's not going to kind of stem out from there. And she feels she's close to solving it, and in her mind, that's all she needs to say to him about this. He does ask her then, if you think that my want for an external review of the Jedi is a personal vendetta. She says yes, honestly. But he says, while we're being honest, let me give you my thoughts on the Jedi. Jedi are a massive system of unchecked power, posing as a religion, a cult that claims to control their control like a power. She says, we don't claim to control the Force, but no, I'm talking about, like, emotions. He feels one of them will snap, and when it happens, who will be strong enough to stop that person? Now, this is a super interesting line, given what finally gets confirmed here with Vernestra, that her Padawan is actually Keimer. He has left, and the idea is who is powerful enough to stop him. That sort of thing. We've had this happen before. The fall of Jedi is often a very bad thing because they are powerful, obviously. But it's obviously ignoring a lot of the good that the Jedi do, basically all of the good that the Jedi do, and he's just very fearful of them. And then it's also like you have to have in the back of your head the whole time of like, really, like a politician from the Senate, given what the Senate is known for in like recent times, what it's going to especially become, you're accusing the Jedi kind of like not being in control when like the Senate is this borderline non-functional entity to a certain degree. This is the debate that you have here, is that there are kind of problems on both sides, but is this the right thing to do or not? She says that this is not an opinion shared by the rest of the Senate. He says his colleagues cannot imagine a galaxy without the Jedi. That when you look up to heroes, you don't have to face what's in front of you. And so, yeah, he has reported the lack of transparency to Chancellor Drellick. And he basically sets up the idea there's going to be some sort of a tribunal about this. You better prepare yourself and hope that you get lucky coming out of this. So this is the big thing. It's this whole idea of the external review of the Jedi and what that will lead to. Vernestra doesn't want this to happen. And obviously the setup here very clearly is what is one of the main problems with the Jedi in the prequel era when we actually get there. It's that it seems like the Jedi are now even further basically under the control of the Senate. That the Jedi are not really allowed to act on their own unless directed to by the Senate, basically. So that ends up causing a lot of problems for them in that prequel era Jedi. That's the core criticism is, why can't you act on your own to help people? Why are you having to do what the Republic want you to do? Versus here, the criticism is that the Jedi have almost like too much freedom to keep their investigations to themselves, and this senator wants them to be sort of more accountable and more under the control. And the idea is we're being presented with the kind of problems of like both ways of what will happen and what is kind of happening now. And it's just the idea that with any sort of organization, there will always be individual instances of something that happens. But you kind of have to take the overall broad view of like that the Jedi are mostly good, that should they be eliminated just because there is the potential for some bad eggs, that sort of idea. But do we say the same about the Senate? You know, that whole idea. So it's this interesting situation of we're exploring effectively one of the things that will lead to the fall of the Jedi, which is, I'm guessing what we're doing here is we are setting up that through Sith manipulation effectively, we're going to get I'm thinking two things happen. One, obviously, is Palpatine and what he directly does, which is he becomes a senator, then becomes the Supreme Chancellor, and then is able to bring the plan to fruition from that actual position of power he has manipulated his way into. The other point of that is that they also have to engineer the position of the Jedi are under the thumb of the Senate. And I'm guessing the result of the overall Acolyte story is that the Jedi end up having to answer more to the Senate. And that will be another success, ultimately, to pave the way for then Palpatine to come in and effectively be able to basically limit what the Jedi are actually doing. Then we get the big one here, the big scene here. So really quickly, Osha and Keimer talk as they head onto the ship and basically leave. There is some interesting stuff here before we get to the Plagueis scene. And it's just the idea of, you know, Osha does actually think Keimer is quite fair. But she also thinks what she is offering here of like, yeah, come with me is fair. He says, I think you need to be trained. Will you consider it? And she's like, no. Because I'm not my sister. Keimer agrees with this because May made the deal without even thinking about it. And so there's that little bit of a debate there, especially with the idea of like, you know, I'm not my sister, and I suppose like in some ways, but actually we are being told technically you are your sister, but there's a weirdness surrounding that, of course. But then, as they depart, a figure in a cloak is revealed to be watching them from the caves, and obviously this has to be Darth Plagueis. Very clearly, it is meant to be a Mune. The audio descriptive track describes it as like someone in a cloak with a elongated face, and that is one of the main things with the Munes, is that they do have the kind of quite long heads, and they have the kind of spindly hands, which you can see here. Now, technically, the name has not been said anywhere. The subtitles don't say Plagueis. I don't believe Plagueis is mentioned in the credits. The audio description doesn't actually say Plagueis. And at the time I'm recording this, I don't believe any of the typical interviews with the showrunner have come out yet. I'm assuming she will confirm that this is Plagueis, because that's going to be like the first question asked, I'm guessing. So there's no way they're going to say this is someone else. So it is Plagueis, Darth Plagueis. The question though is that there's really like, there's a lot of questions around this of like, is Tenebrous still actually around? Is Plagueis the master? And that's what we're actually doing here, of like, Chimer used to be under Plagueis, or are we doing something kind of different here? But the fact that he's just there, like he's in the cave, he's on the same planet, and it's like, does Chimer know this? Is Plagueis just in like full stealth mode here, just monitoring things from the shadows? Has he only recently come across Chimer, or has he been here the whole time? Like there's so many questions you have about this, but it is super cool that they finally revealed this. Now, some people might complain immediately, and it's basically the Ki-Adi-Mundi situation again, of like, oh, but Plagueis is not meant to be this old or something like that at this exact time. And it's like, again, 2014, we were told Legends material isn't canon anymore. The only dates we have surrounding Plagueis are from the Plagueis novel, basically, which isn't canon anymore. So in the same way that it's perfectly fine for them to, in the new material, the Disney canon, alter Ki-Adi-Mundi's age, them altering the kind of the exact details of the era of Darth Plagueis is perfectly fine, because this is the new canon. Because for various other reasons, the Darth Plagueis book can't be like fully considered canon, because it has references to much older like Legends books as well, which aren't canon really at all. So they do have to kind of do this kind of new iteration. And again, they probably still are going with the idea that Darth Plagueis' master is Tenebrous. It's just that everything is shifted back a little bit, because Plagueis is maybe older than we actually think, and you know Tenebrous is just like a bunch of years beforehand. That whole idea. I think that's the overall takeaway from this, and I think it will be very telling if the kind of show's kind of haters are once again going to play the obvious card of basically, I don't know what Star Wars Legends is versus canon anymore. But anyway, we do have Soul landing on Brendok. He puts the transponder back on, and then uses the Force to track May. Then we get another Vernestra scene. This one's quite interesting. She's trying to message someone, and is basically like, it's a he, is what she says. And the reply over the comms is like, this is highly unorthodox, but I'll see what I can do, basically. And then we cut away. The only thing I can think of is this meant to be the setup scene for the final scene of the episode, setting up the idea that Vernestra is actually trying to contact Yoda here, but she needs to set up a meeting through someone else. Otherwise, I actually don't know what it is. I think I'm inclined to not like excessively read into this as being something suspicious, and more like, oh yeah, the Yoda scene at the end is a little bit random, so this is probably the only disconnected scene that probably is actually meant to be linked to there. But anyway, she's then informed that Soul's transponder is back on, coming from Brendok, and she's going to take a team there immediately. And yeah, this is where we just get the quick scenes of like, okay, everyone's arriving at Brendock. Keimer and Osha arrive as well. Then there's some nice, interesting scenes here of like, because we're on Brendock for the first time in the present day, the first time like since the big incident, I like the echoes of what happened in the past, that we walk past a lot of these key locations. The courtyard where Sol killed Anastasia, as I have in this screenshot here. The walkway where Sol had to make his big choice. The entrance elevator out front where a decent amount of action happened as well. And a lot of the characters who do have the Force can effectively almost like sense what happened here all those years ago. So it's in Sol's head because he's just retold the story and he was so heavily involved in what happens. We see Osha fix the elevator as Keimer uses this opportunity to disappear. Because of course they're basically, fighting each other effectively to see if they can gain control of May, because Osha's vision seems to suggest that, May might not be a failed candidate as an apprentice, but we'll see what is actually going to happen here. So we get the walkway scene, of course, where he made his big choice. He goes back. We see May at this point appear climbing up from here. And she then finds her way to the location where she set the fire. And this is where I actually do think there's some good like cinematography, and just like these are interesting scenes to just compare 16 years ago to now. And the idea of like a lot of these characters of like, yeah, this is where I made my big decision that played a part in the overall event that kind of caused all of this. What does that mean? A lot of these questions kind of get asked, that sort of thing. Then we get the fight scene, and this is a fantastic fight once again. I like that it is just one-on-one. There's not really much more complexities to it like there was in like the forest fight where there's so many different combatants and then eventually we got to one-on-one. No, this is just one-on-one like the whole way through, and there's a little bit more sort of space for most of it, and there's a kind of clarity to it that I really do like about this one. There's some great stuff in this one in terms of how they tell the story of this fight. Of like, you get the idea again. They're even. We saw that in the first fight. The two of them actually are quite even. Keimer has some clever moves that could allow him to get the advantage over Sol just because of his unique fighting style. Sol is probably the better hand-to-hand combatant when it comes down to it, and so the idea is who's actually going to win. So yeah, after they fight through the walkway in kind of cramped corridors, they make their way into the courtyard where it's much more open. And then we get the first idea of Keimer's first kind of special move is to break out the second lightsaber and go after Sol. But Sol defends like perfectly and actually manages to kind of disarm him of the second lightsaber. And I love that like after this happens, he sends kind of Keimer flying and then just like reignites his lightsaber and takes up a stance of just like, I'm in full control. What will you do next? Just getting across of how skilled he really, really is. So that's super cool. The next big move is super cool. Keimer force throws both lightsabers while sort of charging at Sol. So we get this kind of three-way attack here where it's sort of like with his lightsaber, is there any way he can actually block all of this stuff where like two lightsabers coming at him plus Keimer coming in with I guess a force-assisted punch? How does he actually block this? But he just super calmly deactivates his lightsaber, puts it on his belt, and charges up this like AoE force attack that sends both lightsabers flying away, sends Keimer flying away. And again, he strikes a different pose this time. It's more like directly in front of him. And it's just like, ooh, Sol is on it here. I think he has Keimer's number here. Now, obviously, Sol doesn't necessarily maybe push for the kill exactly here, but he defensively seems to be able to keep up with Keimer, which I just thought was super cool. Then we go to Osha and May talking, and again, it's in basically their own room from the past. This was the room where effectively the fire happened. You know, there's a significance to this, and so May the whole time here is basically just trying to explain that, hey, I know the truth. Soul lied. You know, Soul killed our mother. That whole idea. Initially, Osha won't listen because she points out that, you know, Soul tried to help me deal with my negative emotions. This is why I failed as a Jedi, is that I could never control my negative emotions, my anger towards you, my hatred towards you, the grief over the loss of like our people, our mother. That's why I failed as a Jedi. But then she reiterates, Soul killed our mother. He is the reason you have those emotions. So of course he wouldn't be able to kind of help you kind of like through them, basically. That you didn't fail, he did. And she doesn't know, she's trying to kind of sort out her feelings, and she attacks. So Osha attacks May here, and they have a hand-to-hand fight that's actually really, really cool. There's some definitely fun hand-to-hand action sequences here. They are evenly matched throughout all of it. Especially because like you kind of wonder, like some of the shots is like, oh, I wonder how they filmed this or made it work properly, because there is only one, like the actress doesn't have a twin, unlike I think the younger versions where they actually had two different twins play the role of May and Osha. It is just one actress for older Osha and May. So I'd like to know some of the details about that, of like, is it CG, or is it just really cleverly shot so that like you never see the faces kind of both facing the camera at the same time? But it's cool stuff anyway. The duel with Soul and Chimer continues. This is where we see the Jedi ship with Vernestra like arriving. Chimer notes, you know, they're not here for me. So he can kind of sense where this is heading, that he just needs to stay out of the way here and everything will work itself out, basically, is kind of Chimer's approach. Osha and May also spot the ship, and May uses this distraction to disappear. So the duel kind of ends with this interesting sequence where like the last sort of gimmick Chimer has to his advantage is, I'll use my Cortosis mask to strike your lightsaber, or get you to strike my mask. That'll deactivate your lightsaber and I'll get the victory that way. And so it's this really fun sequence where in other cases he was able to just in the middle of the fight just headbutt the lightsaber. But here, because Soul is so skilled and kind of on his level, he has to be a bit more controlled about when and where he does it. So he kind of engineers a blade lock where he's basically, it's like a reverse blade lock effectively, where he kind of gets behind Soul's lightsaber and is like pulling him in to it that way. And Soul is trying to pull back instead of forward like it kind of usually is. But again, Soul is able to reverse this and dodge it, and then we get the kind of samurai style ending to the duel where Soul cuts through Chimer's lightsaber, and that seems to end the fight. They don't really answer the question of like, I guess he cut through basically both of his lightsabers, but the cut seems to be a little bit too far up, to the point where like I think he probably should have been able to just take out the bottom of it to act as a lightsaber. But the idea is this is Chimer to a certain degree accepting that in terms of the duel at least he has lost here. So he actually removes his mask and kind of faces Soul. The idea is Soul holds Chimer's life in his hand, but May attacks Soul. And she disarms Soul, so she now has Soul's lightsaber, and Chimer's like, good, oh, this is the future about to come to pass. Give into your anger, strike him down, kill Soul, basically. He's the source of your pain. Complete your journey by doing this. But she throws the lightsaber away and basically says that I don't want to kill Soul. She just wants him to confess for what he did, to face the council, and he'll get punishment that way. And this lines up, of course, with the characterization of May from earlier episodes, that she did abandon sort of the path of being like a Sith apprentice in an earlier episode, thinking that, oh, actually, the option to just get him to, like, you know, reveal the truth basically is better than me having to, like, assassinate people to kind of get revenge that way, because I'm not really getting anything from doing it that way. That it's the idea of kind of the miscalculation surrounding May, is that you're hoping that because she has this want for justice, that immediately results in her having a lot of this kind of dark side intensity and feelings. But we've gradually learned over the course of the series that it's Osha who has the, you know, the welling up of these kind of emotions and feelings that she can't deal with. The dangerous dark side stuff is more present in Osha than it is in May, who's fine to accept, like, one of these characters kind of facing actual punishment for what they did, and that doesn't need to be killing them, basically. It doesn't need to be like a vengeance, effectively. But we'll see what happens coming up here, because obviously this is where you get the sort of telling point of, like, the vision of the future was she held the lightsaber in her hand but killed Soul without using it. But May's just thrown the lightsaber away. What's going on here? And this is where we, of course, get it. This is the build-up to the big stuff here, of course. Soul says that he did the right thing. He tried to protect them both. You know, the response here is from what? He then gets into, once again, what he was trying to say before, which is the idea that the two of you, you're not twins. You're not sisters. You are the same person. I don't know how your mother did it, but she created life, you know, using the virgins. The power that it would take to do something like this is crazy. I'm not sure what exactly happened, but she used the Force to create you both. And that needs answers, basically. Now, the interesting thing in all of this is you don't really get too much of a sense of, like, the sisters, or the two of them, reacting to what this actually means for them, because I guess they just have basically known this, but I'm not sure if it's ever been quite framed to them in this way, that, like, you are aware you guys were, like, literally created by the Force, and then it's a really weird thing that you are technically not sisters. You are just two of the same person, effectively. Like, you're individuals because, like, you have different personalities and kind of you make different choices, but, like, within the Force, it seems like they are the same person. And, like, what does that mean? There's so many questions that surround that. Like, that's something that needs to be addressed. So at this point, Osha arrives. She picks up Soul's lightsaber. May then basically wants him to admit that he killed the mother. He does, and this is where Osha hears the truth. And it's important to have the context here of, obviously, he told the backstory to May, and now Osha hears one scene from that as the truth here, Soul telling her, but she doesn't know the rest of it. And this is why they had to maneuver things around in that way, because you sort of wonder, like, would this go differently if Osha knew the full story? All the build-up, everything that actually happened. If she knew the full situation, would she have the same reaction that she has here? Or is it just that the emotions are so intense for her that the only thing she would ever zone in on is, you killed my mother? Because that's what they, of course, focus on here, but do the details matter to her otherwise? And this is where we get, effectively, the build-up here to the death of Soul. So, again, he argues, you know, I was protecting you, it was the right thing to do. He didn't tell the truth because without May, there wasn't any proof of the virgins. She would have been sent away if the truth actually came out, because otherwise it just would have been accepted that, like, you are too old to train, and so we did what, I did what I thought was best for you. He tries to get across the idea of, this was your dream, and I didn't want to take that dream away from you. But she's like, stop talking, and she force chokes him. And obviously everyone's a bit surprised by this, because this is, I suppose, Keimer realizing that, like, oh, it's her. She had a vision about herself, not about her sister. This is, I suppose, May's first time really seeing Osha powerfully kind of use the Force like this. And it's a kind of, this is the turn that we've been waiting for quite a while. And this is where, we do see a little bit of a scene of, Soul's lightsaber crystal beginning to turn red because of Osha's anger. And then the final little sequence we get here is that Soul says, like, they look at each other eye to eye. And Soul says, it's okay. And then Osha tightens the Force choke and kills Soul. So this is Soul's death. And yes, as I think a lot of people predicted from the last few episodes, Osha is in fact the one to kill Soul, and she does it without using a weapon and while Soul is unarmed. So whichever way your interpretation on that whole kind of quest is, she accomplished both of them. She didn't use a lightsaber, a weapon, and she did it while Soul was helpless effectively in front of her. And this is the idea of, she has done what, her sister couldn't. And this is the proof of, at least for Keimer, you will make a good Sith acolyte because you were able to do this. Then we move on to, actually, yeah, this is wrong here. This is meant to be Keimer. Sorry, I just had that written wrong. Keimer puts his hand on Osha's shoulder, but she ignites the lightsaber, kind of pushes him away. This is where we see the change actually happening. We get the, what's this called? This is the, bleeding of the lightsaber crystal? Or is that the reverse? I forget, but either way, this is a thing that's been talked about before, but I think it's our first time in live action ever seeing it. The idea of a Force user and their sort of alignment changing the color of a lightsaber crystal. So in this case, it is a kind of normal crystal being turned red for the dark side, of course, as it goes from blue to red, of course, which is a very cool scene to see this. And it highlights, of course, this is Osha's power in the Force coming out full force here. Then we start to get some of the bigger reveals here. So Vernestra gets off the ship and immediately senses Keimer. And so this is where we get the connection. You're still alive. I can't believe it. He senses her sense him, so puts the helmet back on, so he's kind of blocked out. But the damage in a way has been done. The information is out there. So she heads towards Keimer to figure this out. So yes, this is effectively where we get the confirmation, and it's doubled down on towards the final scenes. Keimer was in fact, or Keimer's master, Jedi Master, was in fact Vernestra. That is the details. The question here in terms of like the whole, are you alive? Is it because he's a human and he shouldn't have lived this long? Because it might have been much earlier on for her, but like, wait, I've sensed you and you don't look that older. Or is it just that because he has the scar in his back, I thought I killed you that day? That sort of thing. That there's a question about like what some of this stuff exactly means. But anyway, May and Osha know that they need to go. May knows the way out. At this point, we see the Jedi enter the fortress. We do find out that May, how she survived her fall was that she got sucked into the core tunnel as she fell down. So this is effectively the how Luke Skywalker survived falling off Cloud City kind of style thing. So they kind of bring that back here. That's how she survived and made her way out. In the courtyard, we then see the Jedi. They find Soul's body. Vernestra does sense through the Force kind of what happened here 16 years ago. She has everyone else set up a perimeter, and so she's left alone with Soul's body, basically. We get the scene here, they'll refer back to it later, where she whispers something to Soul's body, basically, before looking up to see no one there. But of course, we're seeing this happen from Keimer's perspective, looking down. So the idea is Master and Apprentice just like miss each other, basically. Or he doesn't want to be found by her, which adds a lot to Keimer's character. We want to see what happens there. Basil, of course, at this point is leading the Jedi to May through his tracking. And then we get the I'm just going to call them sisters to refer to them that way because it's so complicated otherwise. And the sisters have an interaction at the tree, obviously referencing that this is kind of one of the first scenes in the first flashback that we saw with them. They both apologize to each other. Osha for not like believing, trusting May, and then May for starting the fire. So she does kind of, I suppose, finally admit that that was actually a problematic thing to do. They don't really address, and I suppose this is one of those things when it comes to the flashback, the idea that in episode 3, we directly had the idea of like what May saying to Osha, I'm going to kill you. But they never showed that scene again in episode 7. So was it a case of, was that a misleading scene? Or did that actually happen? They just didn't recap it in episode 7. But, you know, that's just an extra thing. So they say they rhyme to each other. Interesting detail. Osha's like, oh, I thought you made it up. Almost highlighting that, like, where did it come from? Like, who thought it to them? That, like, you think they'd both know if it was, like, Anastasia who thought them. So it's like, oh, May came up with it? What's that about? Kymer then arrives. He grabs the lightsaber and is like, hey, if I can find you, the Jedi can as well. We've got to sort out what we're going to do here. So after a bit of the discussion, the trio do make their decisions. What's going to happen here is that Osha is going to train with Kymer, and May will kind of go free. With the idea, I think, mostly being here that May, separate from Kymer, usually would result in Kymer wanting to kill her. But they do address the idea of, okay, how can May be free in a way that, you know, she can't just be used to then find Osha and Kymer. So Kymer's going to wipe May's memory by removing any basically trace of Osha and Kymer permanently. He does say, like, I will, like, attempt or try to do it, maybe suggesting that it could be not perfect, which seems to be the approach they're taking, because Vernestra at least seems to think that after this, May can still be used to find them. So there is a sadness here as the sisters realize they will have to leave each other again. They hug, but Osha says that, you know, one day, you know, I will find you again. And again, they say the rhyme to each other as Kymer does the memory wipe here. And you gradually see this taking effect on May as her kind of, in a way, memory of the rhyme like fades away like a little bit. But because I suppose of the timing of how much of her memory is gone, it's one of those things where they kind of get across that, like, she should still know that. But I guess because this memory relates so closely to Osha, and the knowledge of her sister is gone, this also kind of mostly fades away. So I'm almost wondering, like, is there maybe a way to use this rhyme as, like, a way to maybe bring back May's memories or something like that? But anyway, the Jedi find May, they arrest her, and we see that it's a very innocent May who has no clue what's actually happened here, because, as we find out, she basically has no memories of what has happened since she was 8 years old. Because they don't actually say, like, she never explains in her kind of backstory of, like, when she waited at the tree after escaping in the flashback, who found her? Because, like, Coral, like, doesn't reappear in this episode. That's still a bit of a out there thing. So did Kymer find her on this planet? I don't think that's the implication. So how did she make her way into the... How did she meet Kymer is I suppose, a major question. That's an interesting one. May's brought to Vernestra on Coruscant. They have a talk alone. May, this is where we get the reveal, yeah. May doesn't remember everything past 8 years old. Vernestra then explains, basically, it's an interesting sequence here, as it's, of course, it's Vernestra talking to May, but then they intercut it with what Vernestra did on Brendock in terms of, like, Soul's body, but then also showing you bits and pieces of the tribunal with the politicians and the Chancellor. As she reveals the official story as it's being reported of the Jedi, now that they, I suppose, have to openly explain what happened here, this is the way it's going to be told. So, Vernestra tells May that the man who killed her mother was a Jedi. He was a friend, of course, of Vernestra's, a kind, brilliant, compassionate man who did a terrible thing. And again, we get the details of it here at the tribunal with everyone. The Jedi conspired to keep it a secret of everything that happened on Brendok 16 years ago, and that when the truth threatened to come out, a rogue Jedi named Sol killed his accomplices to maintain the cover story. So they're going with the idea that the death of Indara, Kelnaka, and Torben are all now going to be kind of historically attributed to Sol as a cover-up of a cover-up. Basically, it's a kind of crazy sequence here. We learned that what Vernestra whispered to Sol was that she was sorry, basically for the way she was going to sort of use his memory going forward, knowing that he is going to have such a bad reputation post-death for what's about to happen, but she feels this is how it has to be used. The High Council, it's noted here, condemns Sol's actions. Raincourt is there. He wants an external review immediately. Vernestra says it was the work of one flawed man. Question gets asked, where is Sol now? Sol was found dead on Brendok, and the story that they're going for there is that he ended his own life at the scene of the crime, and that's what happened. And yeah, we get a quick intercut here, the idea that Vernestra gave Sol his kind of funeral fire on Brendok, and then she tells May that this mistake twisted Sol's mind and that he justified every selfish step with the love for her sister. May is stunned to learn that she has a sister, even bringing up, like, do you know the name Osha? No. And yeah, Vernestra needs May's help to find someone, a pupil of hers, before he turned to evil. So that is the clear setup there, is I guess Vernestra will really step into, I suppose, a main character spotlight, probably for season 2. And she'll be working with May to try and find Keimer. Now, obviously, if Keimer's memory wipe has worked, this shouldn't be possible, but I guess because Vernestra has trained Keimer, there's some sort of a way to maybe make this happen, which is sort of interesting, combined with, I suppose, maybe other unique skills that Vernestra may have also. But it's certainly interesting overall. And then, yeah, the big thing here is that obviously it's Vernestra obviously hiding from the official report that, you know, May and Osha were really a part of this, like, at all. It's hiding the existence of Keimer from the story as well, because, of course, Vernestra herself is kind of responsible for him being involved, so they're keeping that out of the story. And so the idea is, why is Vernestra doing this? What does she want from this? They're obviously, I think, trying to frame this in a way where it comes across as, okay, something bad happened, but it wasn't like the worst thing in the world. And we're going to blame it on the actions of one Jedi who lost his way. And it's a bad thing that it happened. There might be some reprimands from the Senate towards the Jedi, but they'll be able to move on from this. This maybe likely won't be the absolute kind of thing that ends up with the Jedi being fully under Senate control. Maybe that is the way that they go with it. But Vernestra feels that they still need to sort of keep some of this secret to figure out themselves. Otherwise, like, something else might happen. And it's interesting because it very much comes across as like Vernestra being super, super shady. But then, of course, she goes to Yoda at the end, as we'll see. But we'll get to that. We do cut away to the unknown planet with the Cortosis, you know, Baldamnik, if you want to call it that. Osha and Keimer hold hands, both still holding onto Sol's now red lightsaber, and they stare out into the distant ocean as the kind of ominous music plays. So the idea is, we end with the idea that Keimer finally has his Acolyte, and we look off into the distance. But I guess there's also, in the caves hidden somewhere, Darth Plagueis is probably there also, unless he followed them. We don't really know what the situation is. Where is he on this planet? Who knows? That's a big thing that we're waiting to find out about. And then, yes, the final scene. Vernestra's like, I need to talk to you, Master, and we cut to the reveal of Yoda. So, what's she going to say to Yoda about this? Because obviously she's just lied to the Senate and even May about the exact details of what's happened here. I'm assuming she was trying to get in contact with Yoda in the earlier scene that I was a bit confused about. What's the deal here? Yoda in the High Republic is a bit of a enigmatic character, where he's not just kind of typically locked into the Jedi Temple. He's out doing stuff, exploring, bringing like Padawans on, younglings on like missions and stuff like that. He's a bit more of an active kind of Jedi, and he almost is a bit of like roguishness to even High Republic Yoda to a certain degree. So where's this version of Yoda going to be, and what's the situation here? Because the idea probably has to be that Vernestra, apologies about the spelling there, I think I spelled Vernestra wrong there. Vernestra is probably not going to reveal the full scope of the truth to Yoda. But then it gets into the idea of, wait, how far does she think Kymer has fallen? Because everyone who he said he was like a Sith to is now dead, except obviously like Osha and May. So I guess all she knows from the past is that her Padawan turned to the dark side, but that doesn't necessarily mean Sith. And because Plagueis has only now been like revealed to us as the audience, no one is actually talking about Sith Lords otherwise. So is she just going to Master Yoda and she's probably going to tell the truth about my Padawan fell to the dark side and I think he's involved in this somehow? So again, the Jedi would not be inclined to jump to Sith Lord immediately. Even if they factor in the idea of like so many characters being killed and stuff like that, there is still the idea of like, well, this incident explains some of these deaths. None of it directly confirms a Sith Lord. So that's probably part of the big thing, because they have to keep that continuity up of the Jedi, a lot of the high up Jedi, especially the ones that we know about, should not really have any maybe clear-cut suspicion of Sith Lords between now and basically Qui-Gon reporting the Darth Maul to them. So this, I guess, is going to be an investigation into Vernestra's fallen Padawan. She can learn stuff about the Sith Lord, because Vernestra obviously has to die at some point. So it kind of feels like the story shifts to Sol is this character who has to die, but like there'll be an exploration. This is now maybe Vernestra's story, and I'm interested to see what they do with it. But we need a season 2. It's just like, you can't leave it like this. Like, this would be such a unnecessary tease if we don't get a season 2. Will it? It's hard to say, because you have to sift through a lot of the opinions out there to really find like what is the actual opinion on this show, because I don't think it is the case that this show will just go down as being like hated. The watch numbers seem to be pretty good, especially for a show kind of set in its own time period, where, you know, a lot of the bigger reveals that connect it to other stuff are only coming to light towards the end here. Like, I'm assuming the hope maybe is dropping Yoda here, dropping a lot of the connections of like, okay, here's the Vernestra Kymer connection, here's the Plagueis connection, is an interesting one. The only question I might have about like the significance of like the tease on Plagueis feels like you need to really commit to that. Like, you need to put some posts out on the official Star Wars social media stuff, highlighting that like this is the debut of Darth Plagueis visually in like a canon material, to make that clear, to generate hype. I ultimately think that even among the people who really probably dislike the show, it's probably been hate watched enough that like they'll justify it as like, it's clearly of interest to Star Wars fans, whether they're reasonable or unreasonable in their criticisms, and people seemed quite invested in what does or doesn't happen in this show, is I think one of the big takeaways probably. Because yeah, it wasn't like you were getting a lot of people being like, oh, the first episodes are terrible, I'm not going to watch it. Like, it feels like people are talking about every single one of these episodes because because it's tackling interesting Star Wars content. Sith Lords are interesting because we've basically not done anything with them. And Season 2 offers you the potential to do a very interesting exploration in terms of Kymer's backstory is now hugely interesting because he has a Jedi past and also a who trained him in Sith ways past. Also, plus Plagueis can be introduced properly. That whole idea. So, gonna wrap up the video there with the idea that I definitely think the show at the very least is good enough to justify the Season 2. And I think I think they will take strong learnings from a lot of the reaction to the first season and should be able to maybe refocus on what they really need to do for a follow-up season. I think to a certain degree, whatever they do going forward probably will be helped, especially if they choose not to do the format where like it's all based around a backstory from different perspectives. I think it'll help like that. Maybe they just do backstory in a more of a normal way. But yeah, they're my thoughts on the episode. In the comments, let me know what your thoughts were on The Acolyte. But that's been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.